Welcome back. I hope that you found in Eric Berlow's film something that helped you trigger a thought about how to manage the idea of complexity. One of the first points he makes, which is really useful, is that there is a difference between the idea of complex and complicated. And what he's trying to encourage us to think about in this talk is that if we draw on learning from complexity in nature, we can see that you can predict where and how things are going to happen by linking up their different spheres of influence of different elements in nature. So predictability requires pulling out and looking at the bigger picture. Once you've done that, he's suggesting that actually by zooming out, you get the best chance of zooming in on the details that matter the most, and that will inform the way that you move forward. What we're going to do now is look at a series of different tools and how you can use them to analyse a single situation. We're going to take an example from our own work at Community Resolve, and we're going to think about how we can use Galtung's ABC, or the positions, interests and needs model, a conflict timeline, and mapping visually what's happening, how we can use those to give us a better idea of how to move forward with a whole street conflict. To give you a general sense of the case study, it involved a whole street in the centre of Bristol, where residents who owned their houses and who also often had cars had fallen out with residents who were in social housing and who often didn't drive cars. And in the mix were local children who were playing in the square. Car owners wanted that square for car parking. And in addition, there were visiting young people who were travelling through the square and hanging out there late into night, who came from different areas around the city. This had all blown up into what was really quite a big noise. The councillors were involved, the media was involved, and there was growing levels of dissatisfaction and anger on the square itself. We've talked in a number of earlier sessions about Galtung's ABC, about the idea that you can see behaviours that are at the top of a triangle, but in fact those behaviours are driven by attitudes and context which is different for every single person that's involved. Now we're going to have a look in the next few slides at how you can apply the ABC as a way of analysing a situation. Very helpful for you to get down on paper what is happening for each of the parties in a conflict. So the place to start when you're using Galtung's ABC as an analysis tool is to draw a triangle for each of the parties or groups who are involved in the conflict that you're thinking about. For each of those in turn, you then need to list as many ideas as you've got about what are the behaviours you can see or which are going on. You'll be able to see those, so that will be the easy part. But underpinning that, what are the attitudes that are leading to those behaviours, and what's the broader context for those people? So looking at this slide here, this is about the first group, car owners who are living in private housing on the street. Their behaviours are that they're mean to the children and rather rude to their neighbours. And also that they're being very vocal about their situation. They're getting in touch with the media. They're drawing in local councillors. They're calling the police every day. And to some, not necessarily themselves, they are presenting, maybe even mispresenting the situation very much through their own light. They're not thinking about it from everybody's point of view. Those are the behaviours, but what's that underpinned by? Well, in the context corner, you've got limited parking on this street. They've bought their house, they've paid a lot of money, they've got a nice car to go to work in, but there's nowhere to park it where they think it's safe, because the cars keep getting hit by the children's balls. There's a house price boom, and so they're really thinking about, I want the value of my house to stay as it is. Are these people, and they're holding me back and no parking, is that going to affect my house price? And they're also working in a broader context at that time of an ideology of private ownership. Private ownership equals a better person. That's a very interesting thing. We talked right back in the power session, in session 4, about how ideology is informing and driving a lot of our actions. In the attitudes corner, they've got, I bought my house, I deserve the parking. Also, I don't have children. Why should they have to play instead of my parking? And also, definitely in this particular dispute, a class issue. Those people, the othering that we're talking about in the next session, they are bringing down that value of my house. Okay, in the next 2 slides, we're going to look at then how does this situation look like for the residents in social housing, and then how does it look for the young people who are using the square. So starting with the residents in social housing, they're also involved in rudeness with their neighbours and being mean to some of the children, generally the children or young people who are coming in from outside the area, because a lot of them have children themselves and they are playing in the square. They're also doing a lot of talking to their neighbours who they've known for a long time. They're collecting allies. And in some households, they were beginning to stop their children from playing in the square because of the aggravation. Some of the attitudes that we came across as we talked to people were, those stuck-up people over there look down on me because I have no money. So there was a sense of their own insecurities about that, which was being played into. They thought to themselves, why should our children suffer just because we can't afford a car? And in terms of a context, many of them had been in the area for a very long time as social housing residents, and the private owners were newer arrivals, so there was a sense of entitlement there. This is our patch, not yours. You're coming in with your new ideas. A bigger context, and very important in this dispute, was the fact that the area itself was considered unsafe for children to be out and about on the streets, and so parents wanted to keep their children close to home. But there was very limited local play space. On this slide, we're looking at what does this position look like, what does this situation look like for young people using the square. Their behaviours are including playing the balls, hanging out late into night. And there's also some struggles between local children and the young people who are coming to the square from outside the area. There's a lot of reports of rudeness to local residents who've asked them to keep their balls away from the cars, etc. So the young people's attitudes are very much rooted in, this is my place, why should I have to stop for you, etc. Why are adults always so rude to young people? But the context, as with their parents, are that there is limited place to stay and play or hang out in the neighbourhood. And as many of them do live on the street, they want to play as close to home as possible. Now let's look at the second tool on our list, the PIN model, positions, interests and needs. This is a classic mediation model. It's used by all community mediators and others when they're thinking about why are people saying what they're saying and what is being masked by what they actually say. So on this slide, we're looking at how that model works, and we are thinking about it in terms of 2 people, say, who have fallen out. We have 2 icebergs or mountains again, and right up at the top, shouting as loud as you can, you've got 2 people with their position. So one person is saying, my life is going to be hell until that person leaves. They've got to leave, and that's the only option. And the other person is saying, I'm not changing a thing for them, why should I? It's absolutely ridiculous they should ask me to never play my music in the garden. Both of them have got something that position is hiding. And if you think about that visible and invisible line, the position is the behaviours, but underneath the behaviours sit a lot of other things, attitudes and contexts. And in this model, we think about it in terms of interest. What is it that they want to get? And need. What is it that they really must get? The role here is to help people come down off that mountain and move towards an area of common ground where you can start recognising that they've got a shared interest and underneath that a shared need. So a shared interest, for example, is that they want to get along with their neighbours and not have the stress of fighting with someone. And the shared need is a basic human need of safety and belonging. Let's think about that PIN model now, applied to the case study that we've been talking about. In this slide here, we can see the PIN as it's applied to two groups. One is the car owner group, and the other is the parent group. So for the car owners, a position, for example, when they meet a parent on the street could be, you must stop your children playing ball games in the square. And for the parents, one of their positional statements means you need to accept that children have to play. But what is it underneath that are their interests and their basic needs? So, for example, the car owners is keeping their cars safe. They can't afford to keep replacing those wing mirrors. And another interest is not involving themselves with the children. They're not necessarily children lovers. For the parents, a position is, an interest underlying the position is keeping your children safe and not worrying about other people's cars. So for both of them, the common ground is that I don't have time or money to spend on these disagreements. And the shared need is getting on with your neighbours and feeling safe in your house and your neighbourhood.
For your case study, use an example of a community conflict involving several groups. Focus on drawing a conflict triangle for each of them, looking at the behaviours, attitudes and contexts that you know of that might come up. Then do a PIN model for each party. What's their position? What are their interests? What do they really want? And their needs. Identify areas of common ground for all parties and where you think there would be really stark differences. So, in terms of the example, what were the interests around parking and play spaces?